"On your feet, Vance!" Gunny Thorne roared across the Paris Island gravel pit. He slammed the recruit they called Princess to the ground. "She's pathetic," a bully laughed. But as she fell, her shirt ripped, exposing a coiled serpent tattoo on her shoulder. What they didn't know? The woman they tormented was Chimera 1, sole survivor of an elite ghost unit. And the decorated sergeant attacking her was the very traitor she had come to hunt. The air on Paris Island was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket woven from the thick humidity of a South Carolina summer, salt from the nearby Atlantic, and the ever-present scent of sweat and determination. It was a crucible designed to melt souls down to their core and recast them in the mold of a United States Marine. For Lyra Vance, it was a stage. At 24, her sharp, intelligent beauty and slender frame were an anomaly. Her flawless fair skin seemed untouched by the brutal sun, and her raven-black hair was meticulously pinned into a regulation bun, not a single strand escaping its perfect prison. In her standard olive-drab t-shirt and camouflage trousers, she looked less like a warrior in training and more like a classical pianist who had wandered into the wrong recital. Her quietness made her an immediate target. Cade Rourke, a bull-necked recruit with a chest as broad as a barrel and a sneer permanently etched onto his face, had been nicknamed Rhino for his tendency to charge headfirst into everything. He was 20, full of raw, unrefined aggression, and he saw Lyra's existence as a personal insult. "Still breathing, Princess?" He'd grunt as they ran, his voice a low rumble. "Thought the air here might be too dirty for your delicate lungs." His harassment wasn't limited to words. During a grueling forced march, he had sidled up behind her and, under the cover of the jostling line, expertly loosened the strap on her pack. The sudden shift in weight sent her stumbling, nearly pitching her off the narrow trail and into a ravine. She recovered with a startling, cat-like grace, but the message was clear. His female counterpart was Brielle Thatcher. She was a blonde, athletic girl of 19, whose cheerleader-like prettiness masked a venomous tongue. Where Cade was a battering ram, Brielle was a stiletto. She chose rumors as her weapon, whispering to anyone who would listen. "I heard her dad's a senator," she'd confide, her voice dripping with feigned concern. "She's just here to get a nice photo for his re-election campaign." Overseeing this theater of pain was Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Thorne. He was a man in his late 30s, built from granite and wire, with eyes the color of a winter sky. He was a living legend, his uniform adorned with ribbons that spoke of heroic deeds in Fallujah and Helmand. Thorne drove every recruit to their breaking point, but his treatment of Lyra was a unique brand of cruelty. It was focused, personal. "The battlefield doesn't care if you're having a bad day, Vance," he would roar, his voice cracking like a whip. "Your hesitation will get your squad killed." The animosity culminated during hand-to-hand combat training. The gravel pit shimmered under the oppressive heat. Thorne called her to the center. "Let's see if there's any fire behind that pretty face," he commanded. He didn't attack like an instructor. He attacked like an enemy. He probed her defenses, his movements a blur of controlled violence, forcing her to react, trying to bait her into revealing a skill set no recruit should possess. Lyra moved on instinct, her body a fluid whisper of blocks and parries honed over 1,000 secret hours. She was efficient, deadly. Thorne saw it, and it enraged him. He feinted high, then swept her legs with a brutal, vicious kick. Lyra's feet left the ground, and she crashed down hard onto the sharp gravel. The fall ripped her t-shirt wide open at the shoulder. Blood welled from the raw abrasion, and beneath it, stark against her pale skin, was the tattoo. A jet-black serpent, coiled in a perfect eternal circle, devouring its own tail. The Ouroboros. A collective gasp went through the platoon, but Lyra didn't look at them. Her eyes were locked on Thorne, and in that frozen moment, she saw it. Not surprise, not curiosity. She saw a flash of cold, hard recognition in his icy blue eyes. He knew that symbol. He knew her. Her enemy was no longer a faceless shadow. He had a name. From the shade of the medical tent, Navy Petty Officer Keon Doc Reyes was treating a recruit for heat exhaustion when he heard the commotion. At 26, Keon had the weary eyes of a man twice his age, a constant shadow of exhaustion that his fit, wiry frame couldn't hide. A single jagged scar ran along his forearm, a permanent reminder of a life he'd left behind. He stepped out just in time to see Lyra go down. As he knelt beside her, intending to check for a concussion, the tattoo seized his attention. A jolt of ice-cold electricity shot up his spine. The world around him dissolved into a memory, vivid and horrific. The deafening roar of an IED in a dusty valley in Kunar Province, Afghanistan. The frantic, static-filled scream of his best friend, Danny, over the radio. And the last thing he saw before the chaos. A classified intel brief he'd only glimpsed. A mission plan that had a strange, unfamiliar symbol in the margins. A snake eating its own tail. That brief had led his team, his brothers, into a perfectly executed trap. The scar on his arm, a souvenir from a piece of shrapnel, began to throb. He looked at the impossible tattoo on the recruit's shoulder, then glanced up at Gunnery Sergeant Thorne, standing motionless across the pit. Keon's personal haunting ghost suddenly had a shape, and it wore the face of a hero. Lyra's existence on Paris Island had transformed into a high-wire act over a pit of vipers. Thorne's recognition had changed the game. He couldn't expose or eliminate her overtly without revealing his own complicity, so he turned the training itself into a weapon. His methods were a masterclass in psychological warfare, designed to break her or force her hand. The most blatant attempt came during a live fire exercise. From the range tower, Thorne personally directed the drills, his voice a calm, menacing presence over the loudspeaker. When it was Lyra's turn, the targets in her lane began to pop up in a chaotic, unsynchronized sequence, violating every standard safety protocol. They appeared from the sides, behind other targets, forcing her to pivot and fire with a speed and precision that screamed of special operations training, all while rounds from adjacent lanes whizzed dangerously close. It was not a malfunction. It was a performance being demanded of her, a deadly test Thorne was forcing her to pass. She survived, but the message was clear. Each night, as the barracks fell into a chorus of snores and murmurs, Lyra would retreat into her own world. Beneath the thin wool blanket, she'd retrieve the device, a wafer-thin data slicer disguised as the heel insert of her boot. Its soft blue light illuminated her face as she bypassed the base's firewalls, her fingers moving with silent speed over the holographic interface. The prize was the complete operational plan for Operation Vindicator. As she scrolled through pages of dry logistical data, the trap became horrifyingly clear. The phased assault routes were designed to funnel Platoon 3046 into a narrow concrete culvert with no secondary egress. The designated backup communication frequencies were scheduled for routine maintenance, ensuring a total comms blackout. And there it was, buried in an ordnance manifest, a requisition for a block of M112 demolition charge, UP-4, and a radio detonator, listed under a sub-protocol for EOD training that was not on the platoon's schedule. Thorne wasn't just planning an ambush, he was staging a massacre. Keon couldn't let it go. The ghost of his friend Danny was a constant whispering presence demanding action. He knew he was risking his career, possibly even a court-martial, but inaction was a luxury he could no longer afford. He used a burner phone to contact Javier "Javi" Rios, a former Navy intelligence analyst he'd served with. Javi was out of the service now, a civilian contractor with a cynical view of the world, but an unshakable loyalty to the men he'd fought alongside. He was short, stocky, with a quick smile that didn't quite reach his cautious eyes, and he owed Keon his life after a firefight in Ramadi. "You're asking for federal prison, Keon," Javi's voice crackled over the encrypted line. "But for you, I'll see what I can find." 3 agonizing days later, an encrypted email appeared in Keon's inbox. The file was a single heavily redacted PDF, the full intelligence command structure for the Kunar operation. As Keon scrolled down, his heart hammered against his ribs. There, at the bottom of the chain, was the name of the final intelligence aggregator and approver, the man who personally vouched that the patrol route was clear of significant hostile activity. It was a young, ambitious sergeant on a fast track to promotion, Marcus Thorne. The breath left Keon's body in a ragged gasp. The enemy who had haunted his nightmares for years now had a name. He found Lyra that evening in the armory, where she was meticulously field-stripping a rifle by herself, a punishment detail from Thorn. He approached slowly, the scent of gun oil thick in the air. He didn't ask a question. He made a statement. "The Ouroboros symbol, Kunar Province, Afghanistan," he said, his voice barely a whisper. It was there, too. Lyra's hands stilled. For a full 10 seconds she didn't move. Then, slowly, she lifted her head, and her cool gray eyes met his. The icy mask she wore so perfectly had a hairline crack in it. In her eyes, Kian saw the same echo of loss that he saw in the mirror every morning. She wasn't alone anymore, and that made her infinitely more dangerous. A bruised gray sky hung low over Paris Island, promising a storm that had already arrived in spirit. The air was electric with the nervous energy of Operation Vindicator. For the recruits, this was the final exam, the culmination of their suffering. Cade and Brielle stood at the front of the formation, their confidence bordering on arrogance, shouting cadences with gusto. From the command tower, a glass and steel perch overlooking the sprawling mock city, Gunnery Sergeant Thorne's voice was a calm, steady instrument of control, guiding his lambs toward the slaughter. "Move, Marines! This is what you were born for." Then, hell opened up. The sound was wrong. It wasn't the hollow pop of blanks they had been trained to recognize. It was the sharp, violent crack of a supersonic round breaking the sound barrier, followed by the sickening thud of its impact. The recruit directly in front of Lyra collapsed, a dark, blossoming stain spreading across his chest. A moment of stunned silence, then chaos erupted. Screams tore through the air, raw and terrified. "Live rounds! They're using live rounds!" someone shrieked into the comms. The most confident warriors were the first to break. Cade and Brielle, who had been leading the charge, were now plastered against a concrete barrier, their faces ashen with a terror they had only ever seen in movies. This wasn't a test. This was an execution. Amid the pandemonium, Lyra moved. The quiet recruit was gone, incinerated in the first volley. A commander rose from her ashes. She grabbed the radio from the squad leader's dead hands. "All call signs! This is Vance. Do you copy?" Her voice wasn't loud, but it was a blade of pure steel that sliced through the panic. "Gunnery Sergeant Thorne is the hostile. I repeat, Thorne is compromised. We are the target." She began turning their training into a survival strategy. "Rourke, I need you to make the loudest noise you can at the 3 o'clock. Thatcher, you've been watching everyone since day one. Give me eyes. Report every hostile muzzle flash you see." She weaponized Cade's bravado and Brielle's observant nature. Out of the terrified lambs, a wolf pack began to form. At the field aid station, the first reports crackled over the radio. Real-world casualties, multiple gunshot wounds. Kian froze. The smells of antiseptic and fear were replaced by the phantom scent of dust and cordite from Kunar. He saw Danny's face, heard his final garbled words. He saw the blood. For a full, agonizing second, the ghost of his past had him in a chokehold. But then, a new sound broke the spell. The high-pitched, pain-filled cry of a 19-year-old recruit being carried in on a stretcher. This wasn't history. This was now. He could change the outcome. He grabbed his trauma bag, holstered his sidearm, and sprinted toward the sound of the guns. He was no longer a haunted observer. He was a corpsman on the battlefield. He would drag his comrades out of hell if he had to. He and Lyra, separated by chaos but united in purpose, were now fighting the same war, a war for redemption. The battle for Paris Island had devolved into a deadly chess match. From his perch in the command tower, Thorne moved his loyalist shooters with precision, tightening the noose around Lyra and her fledgling squad. His voice, laced with sadistic glee, echoed over the open comms channel. "Do you see now, Chimera 1? You're just as helpless as your dead teammates." "You've made a mistake, Thorne," Lyra's voice cut back, cold as steel. "You think you're fighting me, but you're fighting all of us." She signaled to Cade. His face was a mask of fear, but behind it, a flicker of a Marine's resolve was taking hold. "He thinks you're a coward," Lyra said to him. "Prove him wrong." With a guttural roar that was part terror, part defiance, Cade broke cover, sprinting toward the designated evac building. It was a suicide run, a desperate act of heroism that drew the full attention of Thorne's snipers. But it was the sacrifice the plan required. From a high window, Brielle, her eyes sharp and focused, tracked the muzzle flashes. "Clock tower, 3rd floor," she relayed. "He's moving to intercept Cade." The final confrontation was set for the evac building, where the C-4 lay waiting. Thorne, anticipating Lyra's arrival, took up a position in the darkened hallway. The door creaked open. A figure stumbled in, wearing Lyra's torn, blood-stained T-shirt. Thorne raised his rifle, a triumphant sneer on his face, but hesitated. It wasn't Lyra. It was Brielle. That moment of confusion was all Lyra needed. She dropped from a ceiling rafter behind him, a silent shadow of vengeance. The fight was brutally short. There was no exchange of blows, just a single fluid sequence that disarmed him and left him on the floor, gasping with her knee on his throat. The military tribunal was a somber, sterile affair. Marcus Thorne stood before a panel of 3 high-ranking officers, stripped of his uniform and his honor. The lead judge, a stern-faced colonel with silver hair and a gaze that missed nothing, listened impassively as the military prosecutor read the charges: treason, espionage, 16 counts of premeditated murder, and dozens of counts of attempted murder. The evidence, including Thorne's offshore financial records detailing the millions he received for his betrayals, was irrefutable. "Marcus Thorne," the colonel's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "This tribunal finds you guilty on all charges. You are hereby stripped of all rank, titles, and benefits. The sentence is life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole, to be served at the United States Disciplinary Barracks, Fort Leavenworth." Justice, when it finally came, was swift and absolute. Days later, Lyra stood in the office of General Miller, a man in his late 50s whose shoulders seemed permanently burdened by the weight of command. He pushed a file across his desk. "This was the price of their lives," he said grimly. "Task Force Chimera is officially gone, but its purpose is not. I'm authorizing the Phoenix Initiative. Rebuild it, Vance, from the ashes." Lyra accepted. Her new unit would not be comprised of ghosts. Her first candidates were waiting for her outside the general's office. Cade and Brielle stood at perfect attention, their faces no longer showing arrogance or fear, but a hard-earned strength. "Commander," Cade said, his voice steady, "we'd like to be your first volunteers." That evening, Lyra found Kian on the beach, the Atlantic waves washing over the sand. "This scar," Kian said, tracing the jagged line on his forearm. "It doesn't ache anymore." Lyra stood beside him in silence, the salty wind whipping strands of hair from her bun. They were 2 broken pieces of a long and brutal war who had found a way to fit together, to start healing. As the sun began to rise, painting the horizon with strokes of gold and purple, they didn't see an ending. They saw a new mission, a new dawn. Lyra Vance's story teaches us a powerful lesson, that the greatest strength is often hidden, forged in fires we never see, and that redemption is possible for anyone willing to earn it. It reminds us that miracles don't always come with a thunderclap from heaven. Sometimes God's grace is quieter, more profound. It's the unbreakable will of a single person standing against injustice. It's the courage found in the heart of a young recruit who everyone dismissed. God didn't send an army of angels to Paris Island. He sent one quiet woman who became the rock upon which others could stand and be saved. In our own daily lives, how often do we judge a book by its cover? We see a quiet coworker, a struggling neighbor, or a family member who seems weak, and we make assumptions. We never know the secret battles they are fighting, the incredible resilience they hold in reserve. This story is a call to look deeper, past the surface, and to recognize the potential for a hero, for a phoenix, in everyone we meet, and even in ourselves. If this story of courage and redemption touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need this message of hope. Comment below with your own story about a time you witnessed unexpected strength in someone. And to ensure you don't miss our next story, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Thank you for watching. May God bless and protect you and your loved ones, and may you always find the strength to rise from your own ashes.